Hello everyone, and thank you for attending today's webinar, Finding Your Value Proposition, Hands-on Product Development with Medical Design and Outsourcing Magazine. I'm Heather Thompson. I'm Senior Editor of MD&O. Before we begin, I wanted to cover a few housekeeping items. At the bottom of your audience console are multiple application widgets you can use. If you have any questions during the webcast, please use the Q&A widget. We will capture all questions and answer them via email. A copy of today's slide deck is available in the Resources List widget, and that looks like a green folder at the bottom of your screen. You can expand your slide area by clicking on the Maximize icon in the top right of the slide area, or by dragging the bottom right corner of the slide area. An on-demand version of this webcast will be available after 1 day, and it can be accessed using the same audience link that was sent to you earlier. And of course, you can tweet with us at MDO, #MDOwebinar. Today, we're talking about value propositions. Eric Claude and Jeff Champagne from NPR Product Development Group are here to share some insights and real-world examples. Jeff is the Director of Business Development, and Eric is Vice President for NPR. They're going to discuss how startups and established companies can create a great value proposition and a business model. At heart, this is about disrupting fee-for-service. This is a model that has been entrenched in medical device business, and Eric and Jeff plan to share some tools and examples for finding those unmet needs, solidifying that value proposition of a medtech product in a new way. And with that, I'll turn it over to you, Eric.
Great, thank you, Heather. Again, I'm Eric Claude. I'm VP of the Product Development Group at NPR, and one of the things that I do with our customers is help them develop strategies for development of new technologies and new products. We're talking about disruption in the healthcare industry. You mentioned that, Heather, and you recently did an interview with Joe Woody, CEO of Acelity, talking about how his organization is responding to some of this disruption and rethinking some of their business models. And today we're going to talk a little bit about how companies can look at these changes and find new ways to deliver value. Because really in the big picture, healthcare has been and will continue to be disrupted by a number of what you might call megatrends. Some of them are illustrated in this picture. So if we're going to be successful in developing new technology and delivering new innovative products, we need to understand this big picture environment in which we're working. So if you look on the left-hand side of this picture, we talk about things like the aging population, increasing wealth, which really means an increasing demand for medical services, longer life expectancy, greater access, growth of the population, chronic disease. All of these things are increasing the demand for healthcare. At the same time, you can see some of the things on the left, price and value-based reforms, cost pressure, uncertainties. These are all factors that are putting pressures on cost for the healthcare system. Go to the next slide. So let's take a closer look at some of these trends. So first, trends related to healthcare providers. This chart illustrates the consolidation of hospitals and acquisitions of medical practice groups with a goal to reach better economies of scale and reduce costs. So this chart shows acquisitions of hospitals, and you can see since 2008 that there's been a rising trend there. So in addition, we have this concept of population health management, which is a trend on the healthcare provider side, where providers are going to have responsibility for the health of a whole population of people, and that's going to drive requirements for greater connectivity, data analytics, and management of that population. And in doing so, we're seeing the desire to extend the continuum of care into lower cost environments, including the home. And this chart is an interesting data point on the desire, the willingness of consumers to leverage technology to access their medical providers. So there'll be trends in terms of driving telemedicine, virtual visits, leveraging mobile health technologies that will become increasingly important in the healthcare industry. So this slide illustrates how the continuum of care fits into the overall population health strategy. And if you look at the slide, the vertical axis is quality of life and the horizontal axis is increasing cost of care. So the highest quality of life at lowest cost is keeping people well, keeping people out of hospitals and the healthcare system. Home care is next, so that's the next thing we want to do, is be able to deliver health care in the home. What we want to avoid is the high cost, low quality of life acute care environments, and so we're leveraging technologies in rethinking our value propositions to be able to accomplish these goals. So how about for the payers? Some of the trends that are affecting healthcare payers are illustrated here. An interesting set of data on the left is cost versus outcomes. If you look at this chart, it shows life expectancy versus per capita spending. And what's interesting to note is not just that the United States is far off to the right in terms of a very high cost, but lower life expectancy with respect to many other countries. So clearly the United States is an outlier from a cost standpoint, and that's driving a lot of the activity with respect to reducing cost in the healthcare system. One of those activities that's being driven by the healthcare payers is shown on the right-hand part of this slide, which is pushing risk from payers to healthcare providers. And so if you look at this chart, what you see is a graph of reimbursement structure change versus the risk taken on by healthcare providers. And where we've been forever is in the fee-for-service area, where the healthcare providers take on very little risk, and that's being increasingly pushed to the right. Pay for performance, shared savings, prospectively paid bundles, and capitation is where we're going. Capitation being essentially another name for the broad population health management that we talked about earlier. So these are some of the factors that are affecting the healthcare industry, and for innovators in the industry, things that we need to be aware of. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Jeff Champagne.
Thanks, Eric. And so as we move to the next slide, we're going to look at what does it mean for you. So again, this is Jeff Champagne. I'm the Director of Business Development for MPR, and I get to work with clients in helping to understand what their objectives are and ways to accomplish those objectives using a highly skilled team of engineers and researchers. With that, when we look at new products, the most important thing, how do you create and capture value from what you're producing in terms of a new medical device development? What does it all mean for you that these changes are occurring in the market and are going to dictate the terms of reimbursement and also approval and adoption in the market for you? So what it means for you as a producer of these products is that you've got a new lens to observe the world through. With the passing of the Affordable Care Act, this lens came into pretty sharp focus, and that was through something called the triple aim. The triple aim is three-pronged, looking at ways of adjusting to this new mindset can be overwhelming. And also, in the next couple of months, we could see a dramatic change and shift in this to a new policy. But the fee-for-service of old is something that we think will still continue to dissipate, and more value creation is going to take over as this happens. So the triple aim is three-pronged. Again, health of a population is going to become increasingly important, looking at overall ways of achieving better health outcomes for the population, keeping those patients well and in those lower cost environments. Number two is the per capita cost. So the cost per patient has to go down. And then also the experience of care through the patient is going to increase. And so through these lenses, we can adapt our perspective of new value creation. So when we talk about new value creation, we also have to keep in mind who these key stakeholders are going to be. In the past, we went directly to a doctor. We had a team of direct sales force that would visit a doctor's office, visit a surgeon, spend time with them in the ER, OR, or other environments, and sell to them right there. Today, that is changing dramatically, and the doctor's role is going to be significantly less in the procurement of new devices. However, the payer and the patient are going to have considerable more buying power as well as input into that process. And the hospitals overall, with the emergence of group purchasing organizations and hospital consolidation, hospitals are going to have a lot more buying power and say in what takes place in that space. Even so much as individuals that are going to be maintaining these products in the hospital environment are high up on the chain of decision makers as these new products are adopted in that hospital environment. And so these are some of the trends that are going to be happening, and they're playing out today in real time. So from the point of view of the physician, the possibility of greater efficiency is a big value proposition driver. So that's something that they're going to look for. How can I see more patients in less time? How can I cut out unnecessary work and also be more efficient? So also combining multiple procedures into one, something that makes their inventory more simple, their logistical support simpler, and also their supply chain simpler. So consolidation of products that are featuring multiple values is something to consider. The patient obviously wants an overall quality of life improvement, reduced times in readmissions into the hospital, shorter stays, faster recoveries, fewer complications, and getting that care delivered in a lower risk environment. So they're happy staying home if they can. So let's take a look at what hospitals perceive as value in this category. So reduced readmissions is a big deal. Hospitals are penalized for anything, any patients coming back into the environment within 30 days, whether it's due to a hospital-acquired infection or other reasons. Procedure revisions are a big deal. Things migrate, tools are left inside the patient, or there's some other failure of that procedure, and having to go in and clean out an infection is not something hospitals want to deal with. Shorter stays, faster recovery times, fewer complications, anything that can reduce these is going to be a value to that hospital system. Greater efficiency for the doctor, shorter procedure durations, being able to see more patients. Again, this is a big driver of value. And then also combining multiple procedures into one, reducing inventory, logistics, and supply chain. And then finally, risk sharing. Bundle payments are going to be a much more prevalent as we move forward. Payers see value from, again, very similar categories: shorter stays, faster recovery, fewer complications, greater efficiency, combining procedures again, delivering care in lower cost environments, so moving things down that value stream into the home. As we mentioned, pushing things to the right on that chart that we saw before. Improve patient compliance. So as you see, a lot of connected devices today are tracking compliance so that they can be reimbursed by the payers. So that proof of compliance adherence is going to be a key element to success in a lot of connected devices, and they're incorporating that into their product plans. And then finally, risk sharing and bundle payments, as mentioned before. Okay, so in slide 14 here, what we're looking at is also an example of similar products but different value propositions. Recently, when I was in Dallas at one of the Texas Innovation hubs down there was a presentation, a competition, and I got to meet the CEO of Innovator Health. Innovator Health takes a look at the same situation that Teladoc prescribes to, is a teleconference consultation with a patient. But the way that they present that value proposition to the patients and also to the physicians is that they provide a stand-up monitor that gives almost a full view of the physician, and you can have an eye-to-eye conversation with that patient. This makes the patient more comfortable, builds a better relationship with that patient, and they feel more connected to that healthcare provider. So very similar product to Teladoc that uses a computer screen and the phone, but in this case, there's more of a connection and more value is delivered directly to that patient. Same cost, but the value is increased. And then finally, so we've included this slide to talk a little bit about the life cycle of your idea. So as your idea goes from theory and research and some technology and science, maybe out of academia, some proven concepts that we would call a belief, and then moves into invention, which is the design, engineering, and prototyping, things that are going to actually characterize the claims in your intellectual property. And then finally it moves to innovation. And I think the biggest difference between creativity and innovation is that innovation, according to one of my mentors, Dr. Christophe Bureau, would be categorized by something that delivers value to the bottom line of the company. So until it's creating value in terms of profits and profitability, it wouldn't be classified as innovation. And that includes your commercialization plan, your roadmap to the market, the delivery of that product through different chains and channels, and then also the acceptance and adoption of that product. And that would include the experience of that product by your customers and patients, et cetera. So how does your product go from idea to innovation? It follows these steps. And then also delivers a broader value to a population. And you can look at the health co-economics involved or other elements that are measurable and quantifiable in the end. So in this example here, we're going to look at one product that's making its way into the market called 3Derm. 3Derm is a startup company in the Boston area. It's actually in an incubator in the Prudential building with Blue Cross and Blue Shields right now. And the reason why they were adopted by Blue Cross and Blue Shield is because they created a dramatic and different value proposition for the payer system with dermatological patients. So very briefly, the story of 3Derm is it's a camera that takes an image at the primary care physician's office, maybe during an annual checkup, and they're looking for trouble spots on that patient which might otherwise have been passed through as a referral to a dermatologist. If anyone out there has seen a dermatologist recently, you know that it takes up to 3 months, maybe 4 or 5 months, to get in to see a doctor. The lines are long, and the care is brief and also quick. So what 3Derm is aiming to do is to triage those patients in a more efficient manner, using the primary care physician as the deliverer of care, and creating a quick diagnostic tool. So what this camera does is it takes a picture at that primary care physician's office of a trouble spot on that patient, and then behind the scenes, that image is loaded up into the cloud. On the other side of the cloud is a doctor, a dermatologist who's being paid time and a half to review these images. And the camera is not just a typical camera. It beats out an iPhone camera, but it's also stereoscopic. So it takes a look below the surface, so you get a nice 3D image of that spot and what's happening below the surface as well. So that dermatologist sitting behind the scenes on his computer has a better look at it than the doctor in person. And they can quickly triage whether that patient needs to be seen by a dermatologist immediately, or if they can be sent home and told it's nothing to worry about, you're all set. This does a number of different things for the payer. Number one, it reduces the number of referrals dramatically. It frees up time for the dermatologist so that they can see more patients. It lowers the cost to the payer system and the insurer from the beginning. It also lowers the cost for the patient. It allows them to have less unnecessary doctor's appointments, and overall creates tremendous efficiencies for the system. So 3Derm is a great example of creating value for the payers as a key stakeholder in this dermatology space. So the real tangible savings are in time and also the risk factor that's involved in this dermatology space. So it saves times. Typically, a patient waits 29 days for a dermatology visit. this cuts that down dramatically. And then also, over the course of our lifetime, 1 in 5 Americans develop skin cancer. So this is a very risky field if you don't have the right tools. And also, this is delivering highly valuable results for both the patient, the payer, the caregiver, and their practice.
Okay, so as we have been discussing, stakeholders are changing in the healthcare industry, and it's important to understand sort of who they are and which stakeholders have the potential to have positive influences or which stakeholders can potentially have a negative influence in respect to a new technology. And so we talk about stakeholder mapping, and this slide illustrates an example of a stakeholder map for home health care. And if you sort of go around the boxes here, in the upper left, we talk about the patient, and we're segmenting the patient population in terms of elderly patients in a number of different socioeconomic areas, as well as other types of patients. The next box over looks at caregivers and the facilities, the people, the support provided by caregivers. The next box talks about investors in relation to home health care, financial support. There's different groups that influence the home health care area, technology providers, and corporate institutions. So each of these groups has different influences in relation to the home health care space. As I said, this is just an example of one way to look at how to capture stakeholders, and we'll talk more about stakeholders and mapping stakeholders in the next few slides.
And it's just important to note that as we're looking at these different stakeholders, to take notes on the aspects of each one. Where can value be created? Where can it be captured? What's important to these individual stakeholders? And you're going to use this later on in this exercise. Okay, and so this is a great model to look at for kind of mapping out your value propositions for your key stakeholders. So once you've identified who those key stakeholders are, you're going to do a value map for each one of them. So let's do as an example what the physician would go through as they look at this, as you're designing value propositions for the physician. Your product or service goes in the left-hand box under product and service. This could be your manufacturable good. It could be a service that you offer. Whatever that is, you're going to write that detail in that box. And then over on the far right, you're looking at the circle that has customer jobs in it. These are jobs that customer, the physician, has to do with that patient. So it might be completing an annual checkup. It might be prescribing a treatment for a chronic condition. It might be just checking in with that patient to see how their condition is progressing. But whatever that job that stakeholder has to complete, you detail that in that box. And I like to do one per value map so that it's very clear and you can focus on that one clear job that stakeholder has to complete. The pains and gains kind of speak for themselves. Those are the things that the stakeholder has to go through as they're trying to complete that job. And if they do a good job, what do they get in terms of a gain? They get a better outcome for a patient. In terms of the pain, if they don't complete that job, what does that entail? If you look at the pain relievers and pain gain creators, those are also directly connected to the pain and the gains. So a pain reliever might be, does your product produce a savings in terms of time, money, effort? Does your product make your customers feel better? What is that pain reliever that is taking place there? And then also on the gain creators, you have to ask yourself a series of questions. Is it something that creates savings and produces outcomes that your customer expects or are better than expectations? What are the gain creators that exist there to drive your value for the segmented stakeholder? So these are important. This is a great map, and it comes from strategizer.com. There's a great book called Value Proposition Design that walks through all of these steps as you're creating these value propositions. But I thought it was a great model to use here, and so we use it as a way of demonstrating how to lay these out. We're going to use this a little bit later as we detail a specific value proposition for an example. So in this slide, what you see is a stakeholder analysis. You're looking at 4 key stakeholders that are identified. I like to stick with these 4 when I'm first looking at a product. Sometimes those are the 4 that pop out and carry along with that product. In other cases, it's going to be a completely separate stakeholder that's not identified here. Also good to think of when you're early in the process is, what do your investors think of this as key stakeholders in the company or the product, and what drives value for them, whether it's the business model or a way of being reimbursed or an exit, et cetera. So in terms of the 4 key stakeholders, though, we're looking at the physician or the nurse, the patient, the payer, and the hospital. And so this just looks at a few of their motivators, or what are the jobs that they have to get done, and what are the barriers. So for the physician needs to document accurate glucose readings for this patient. They need to make sure they've got an accurate record of that patient, and this could be someone who's staying in an intensive care unit or in a hospital ward, and they need to be monitored. The patient wants to get well and go home. What patient doesn't? The payer is looking for a lower cost of care than they've allotted for that specific treatment. So any kind of savings that they find in the way, that's going to be a motivator for them. And then for the hospital, better glucose controls the risk of hospital-borne infections. So if there's any way that they can reduce their risk by getting a better glucose control, they're going to find value in that. So what are the barriers for them to be able to do their job and perform for that patient? The physician doesn't have enough time to do a manual measurement of glucose reading every hour on the hour as suggested. The patient, they have to rely on other people to manage their glucose while they're in a hospital environment. They're not at home anymore, and this is something that is managed for them. For the payer, the hospitals are understaffed, so they have to find a way to be efficient and get a good read on that patient while paying what they've allotted for it. And then finally, the hospital, the error-prone task of measuring that patient's glucose while they're in a hospital environment, it takes up a lot of hours of that nurse's time. So that can be a driver to create more value. So in this slide, what we're doing is we're actually creating an ad lib using that strategizer model for the customer profile. So we're looking at that same model that we looked at before, and understanding how our product or service helps that specific customer segment who wants to, and remember the right-hand side of that circle, to do a specific job by reducing pains or avoiding pains or whatever that happens to be, and increasing the gains, unlike the current manual process or unlike whatever is happening today in the market or the product that you're looking to replace. So in this slide, what we're looking at is an example of benefits to a physician based on a company called Admetzis. Admetzis is a artificial pancreas product for the intensive care unit that monitors and stabilizes the patient's glucose readings based on the ability to add a brake or a gas pedal to that patient's metabolic function. So as a patient comes into the hospital, 80% of patients in the ICU are diabetic. They need that metabolic dysfunction to be managed. And what Admetzis has done is created a closed-loop system with artificial intelligence and machine learning that understands the patient's glucose and how it responds both to insulin and glucagon over the course of the life of that patient in the ICU. And what it does is it gets considerable improvements on the current standard of care. So much so that improved glycemic control has been associated with a 34% reduction in overall hospital mortality, so it actually saves lives, a 40 to 50% reduction in complications at $100,000 per incident is considerable cost savings to the system. And then also patients are getting out of the ICU 1.8 days earlier with a significant $8,000 per patient reduction in cost. So all of these are driving value both for the payer and for the physician and for the patient and for the hospital. And they're considerable savings and value. So if we look at taking Admetzis and putting it into this same model that we talked about, we're going to see a lot of similarities in the way they present their value propositions and why those value propositions speak directly to the key stakeholders involved. So if in the same example of Admetzis, we look at the nurses as the key stakeholder, the nurses have to come in and they take frequent measurements. The recommended measurement is every hour on the hour for these ICU patients. They have to go and they take a physical, manual finger prick. They take a blood sample, put it on a test strip, put it in a meter, calculate the insulin needed, and then they inject the patient with insulin. This is something that is laborious, it's error-prone, and it's inaccurate, and it really takes a lot more time than one would suspect. The average frequency of measurement was not every hour, but actually every 2.6 hours, despite a goal of hourly checks. And then a 12-minute measurement delay from hourly was associated with 67% of severe hypoglycemic episodes. So the goal of this product is not only to monitor and maintain that patient's glucose, but the number one priority is to prevent hypoglycemia. And if they can do that, then they're providing huge value for that hospital. So just that 12 minutes can make a huge difference. So if we look at that in the way that we plug it into a value proposition statement, we're going to look at that on the next slide. Okay, so the next step is to develop the individual stakeholder message. Using that ad lib that we talked about before, we're going to now plug in our examples that we filled out on our sheet and actually plug this into an ad lib. So for the value proposition and the key stakeholder message for the payers, this is an example for Admetzis. Our glucose monitoring device helps the insurance company or the payer who wants to manage the overall cost of care by reducing labor costs and time in the ICU, unlike the current manual procedure. So that's a clear statement. It's almost like a pitch. If you were talking to a payer, this is how you would describe the product. For the physician, it's a little bit different. So in this case, we talk about the nurse. Our glucose monitoring device helps the nurse who wants to deliver a high quality of care, automating glucose sensing and insulin delivery, unlike the current manual procedure. The patient is very similar. So our glucose monitoring device helps patients who want to go home or leave the ICU sooner by stabilizing glucose levels, helping them to heal faster, and reducing the risk of hospital-acquired infections, unlike the current manual procedure. And then finally, the value that's brought to the hospital, our glucose monitoring device helps the hospitalist who wants to reduce time in the ICU by controlling glucose levels and helping patients recover faster, unlike the current manual procedure. So these are just 4 quick examples. Try this on your own with your own products and plug those in using the ad lib that we talked about before. So this slide gives you a blank version of that same ad lib, and you can fill it in with your product and see if it makes sense. Go back and reference that model for the pains, gains, and jobs that the customer has to perform, and you can plug it in the same ad lib style. So the goal is to have a pitch, right? If you're presenting to an investor, if you're presenting to a client, you want to be able to clearly indicate what your value proposition is for each key stakeholder. And this is a great way to do it with this ad lib. So we use that as a pitch primer, and you can try it too with your own product. If you have questions about that, feel free to reach out to us after the webinar, and we can help you make that more clear.
It's Eric Claude speaking again. So now that you have your value proposition, how does that tie into the new product development process? That's what we're going to talk about on this slide, tying it all together. Really, if you think about it, the value proposition, at least when you're starting, it's a hypothesis, and you need to test and validate that hypothesis and adjust it as needed based on what you learn. So that's where value proposition meets lean innovation, you might say. Now, in developing that value proposition, you see our little cartoon on the top right-hand side, right? You've uncovered user needs, and in terms of both opportunities for improvements, gains, as well as pains, things that are difficult for them, and you've mapped those to pain relievers and gain creators, right? So now the trick is to determine a set of product features that are needed in order to deliver, in order to alleviate those pains and realize the gains. So for example, perhaps a gain creator or pain reliever is an ability to integrate data automatically into an electronic health record. Okay, that's great. A lot of products are doing that. So what feature set do I need in order to accomplish that? I need connectivity, I need to move data, I need HIPAA compliance, right? Those are the features that I need to accomplish that. But once I've determined that full scope of product features that I need in order to deliver, that feature set defines your minimum viable product. Now comes the lean innovation part. I've got that feature set defined. I need to rapidly develop, prototype, and test that product concept with representative users. Actually get out in the field and get some feedback on my idea. Validate my hypothesis, right? The key is to iterate and do that early and often. And I'll just make the comment that we typically find that large companies don't do it early and often enough, and that's where delays and challenges in product launches can come in. But this is something that we do every day here at NPR. We bring the design, engineering, and human factors expertise, plus access to end users in the healthcare area that you need in order to be effective in implementing a lean innovation process. And as I said, doing that early and often is a key to success.
Okay, great. Thanks, Eric. So now that we've got everything wrapped up, I'll give you one more tidbit. We'll call this a PS. This is 10 characteristics of great value propositions. This is also from the Strategizer book. Highly suggest you pick up this book. It's a great reference tool when you're doing this exercise yourself. So these 10 characteristics are helpful when you put together your own value propositions as you design your own product. So number one, they're embedded in great business models. As we talked about before, working out that business canvas that has all the different elements, all the different facets of your business. Those are incorporated in there, and they directly speak to those key stakeholders. Number two, they focus on the jobs, the pains, and the gains that matter most to your customers, or those key stakeholders that we discussed. Your laser focus on the stakeholders is how you're going to deliver, create, and capture value in the end. Number three, they focus on unsatisfied jobs, unresolved gains, and unrealized gains. So these are things that have not yet happened in your marketplace. These are kind of pent-up demands and unmet needs that exist today. Number four, great value propositions target few jobs, pains, and gains, but do so extremely well. So we mentioned the pill cam as an example. That pill cam was designed for many different applications, but in the end, the value proposition that resounded was for surgeons to not have to come in the middle of the night, and it meets that need in a very specific way. Number five, great value propositions go beyond functional jobs and address emotional and social jobs as well. Pick up that Strategizer book and you'll see what the difference is between these different types of jobs. A social job might be the way that you fit into a community. An emotional job might be reducing stress in a vice president of development's life as they're trying to adopt new products into their organization. And functional jobs are much more in line with what we talked about earlier today. Number six, great value propositions align with how customers measure success. So what are your best customers' objectives, and how do they measure those successes? Aligning your products with those. Number seven, great value propositions focus on jobs, pains, and gains that a lot of people have, or that some will pay a lot of money for. So if I could pay any amount of money, I would alleviate this pain, and this would make my life so much easier. And that's something that's both important and urgent to that customer, and therefore it's going to be directly in line with your value proposition. Number eight, great value propositions differentiate from competition on jobs, pains, and gains that customers care about. Number 9, they outperform competition substantially on at least one dimension. So we've all seen these charts that show how your product lines up against the competition, and your boxes are all checked, and those competitors' boxes, maybe 2 out of 4 or 3 out of 5 are checked. But for some reason, we've always got ours checked all the way across. Well, there may be one of those that is critical, and that your value proposition delivers on that. That's key. And then also, I'd say number 10, or maybe the number 1 reason why great value propositions succeed is that they're difficult to copy. There's some element of proprietary nature, there's some element of risk, or there's some element of intellectual property that just cannot be copied. So go out there, make value propositions that are going to make a difference. And as one of my mentors in the past said, don't make products, make history. Good luck to you, and if you have any questions about this or other material, feel free to get in touch with us. You can reach us at breakthroughproducts.com. Thank you for participating today. Thank you, Heather, for having us, and we look forward to talking with you all. Thanks so much.
All right, thank you, Eric and Jeff. So now we'll turn it over to the Q&A portion. If you have any questions, you can use the widget below to ask. And if we don't get to all the questions, we'll make sure that the speakers will follow up with you. So the first question that's coming in is, how does our team take this information and do it ourselves?
Great question, Heather. So absolutely, there's a lot of different ways in which you can take this and do it yourself with your team. One of the ways is to contact us, and we can certainly set up a workshop or a webinar to walk through this full value proposition design development. In other cases, I mentioned the Strategizer book. It's a great teaser on the topic. It actually goes into quite a bit of depth in each step on how to define those pain creators or pain relievers and gain creators, and also, how do you really drill down in the value that each stakeholder gets from your product. So lots of different ways. You can do a workshop yourself. You can get in touch with us, but there's a lot of value that you can do in doing this with your team. So thanks for asking.
What other resources might be valuable to you?
Yeah, that's a great question as well. Eric, do you want to talk about some of the sim labs and other groups that we go to for some of these inputs?
Sure. So yeah, one great resource is reaching out to healthcare providers. There are a number of groups in our experience that want to collaborate with industry. They want to participate. They want to be involved. They can be very helpful in understanding within their healthcare provider system who the different stakeholders are. They're absolutely necessary to develop relationships with in order to gain access to representative end users and other stakeholders and be able to talk to them and get that input. So getting out, in the field, so to speak, is probably the most valuable resource.
Yeah, and try and keep it as objective as possible. Reaching to people that are not colleagues, that are not friends, but finding those objective perspectives that are going to really help you kind of fine tune your plan. So another great question.
Right. That actually leads into the next question, which is, I feel like the list of stakeholders keeps growing. How do I manage? Who are these stakeholders? How do I manage them?
Yeah, that's a great question. Recently we were talking to some individuals at Johnson & Johnson at their iLabs in Cambridge, and one of their directors, Sarah Fisher, was talking about the pill cam and the genesis of the pill cam and the value propositions that came from that. And this was a pill that you swallow. It's got a camera on it that leads down the digestive tract. It's able to send back a live feed, and this product had been on the market for a while and been tested out and had a lot of different clinical applications that were being tested. And originally they were looking at ways in which it would reduce costs for the payer and it would make the physician's life easier. And what they settled on was actually it made it so that doctors didn't have to get up in the middle of the night and get dressed and come to the hospital. Because if a patient came in with an esophageal bleed, that doctor could wait at home. They could have the patient take one of these pill cams, and the doctor in real time could watch the recording of that patient and determine if the bleed that was being presented was something that was life-threatening or critical, or if the patient just needed to gargle some salt water and head home. So that it stopped a lot of the cost involved with that doctor coming in. And so that's one of the value propositions that stuck, but it was not clearly evident originally when they designed this of who was going to find value in it. But that kind of shook out in the wash. So sometimes you look at the top four, the patient, payer, the physician, and the hospital, and it's not always clear. And a fifth or a sixth or a seventh might come up and present even more value. So it's important to go into this eyes wide open and look objectively at it, but sometimes it's not always clear from the beginning.
So your advice is you just kind of have to be flexible.
You kind of have to be flexible, and you kind of have to keep your ears to the railroad track, because something that's completely unsuspected could show up as you go through your trials or as you go through your process of gathering input. It might be an investor and a physician that could be the key stakeholders, but in the beginning it could be very evident that it might be the patient. So you never really know until you get all the input. So keep looking until you find that really clear evidence of value.
Yeah, I think it's just it starts with just recognizing that the world has changed and it's not just the doctor anymore. Realizing that there are these 4 or 5 key groups and that you have to get out in the field and talk to them. That's the starting point for understanding who the stakeholders are and what each one's perspective is.
That's right. And so as opposed to looking at it as a product, you really have to look at it as an ecosystem that's created around the patient and all the individuals that are interacting with that patient's care. So it could be a caregiver that saves them time and effort as they're caring for that patient. It could be the physician that's got to keep track of all these patients but just wants to triage the most critical. There's lots of different ways in which it manifests, but sometimes the results are surprising.
Have you ever given the advice that when you're setting up your value proposition, it should be like, do you remember that thing about elevator pitches, that you need to have that like elevator pitch almost for your value proposition?
Sure,
absolutely. Any advice around that?
Changes. Yeah, absolutely, and it changes based on who the audience is, right? So whether you're riding the elevator with a physician or you're riding the elevator with an investor, that pitch primer that we talked about is going to be completely different. So you need to make it resound with that key stakeholder as you're presenting it. So as an entrepreneur, you should have a few different examples of these in your pocket and point them towards those key stakeholders.
That's great. That's actually all the time we have. But I want to say thank you so much to our attendees, and thank you, Jeff. Thank you, Jeff Champagne from NPR, Eric Claude from NPR Product Development Group. Have a great day, everyone.
Thanks so much, Heather, for having us. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks.
So that's all the time we have. I want to say thank you to our attendees, and especially thank you to you, Jeff and Eric. That's Jeff Champagne and Eric Claude from NPR Product Development Group. Thank you, gentlemen. Have a great day.
Thank you, Heather. Appreciate it. Thanks, everyone.